My Lords, there is one insuperable objection to this bill. And it's not to do with the qualities of our hereditary colleagues, which have been referred to many times in this debate, most recently by my noble friend Lord Bethell. Absolutely true. They do the unthanked, workaday, unremunerated jobs. They serve as whips. They sit on all the dull committees that make the place work. But I don't expect that to be as persuasive an argument on the government benches as on these benches. It's not the fact. Seeing my noble friend Lord Remnant, I rather had this fantasy that the very last hereditary peer might be Lord Remnant, and that would have been an enormously suitable thing. But that, again, I don't expect to be a convincing argument. It's not, by the way, the fact that we're removing the only elected element from the chamber. Yes, elected by a tiny group of people, but nonetheless more of a mandate than the rest of us have, my lords, right? That the rest of us are here by the whim of the executive. If you think about what a legislative chamber exists to do, what it's existed to do since Magna Carta, what we've been here to do is to hold the executive in check. The idea of having one of our two legislative chambers wholly appointed by the Prime Minister, if that was happening in Zimbabwe or somewhere, we would all say it was shockingly undemocratic, and being beneficiaries of it doesn't make it any less so. Nor, by the way, is it the breaking of the link back to Magna Carta, which my noble friends have spoken of earlier. And look around at the architecture of this room. It was in the minds of Barry and Pugin to recreate the idea of a medieval king taking counsel of his bishops and barons. You take the actual hereditaries out of it, it's very difficult to see why we can remain being a House of Lords. I think that the idea of our having titles will become absurd once we have snapped that thread with history. And finally, it's not about the government's failure to build consensus behind this major constitutional change, and it is major. It isn't a tiny tidying up measure. Imagine if Olaf Scholz decided to remove 10% of the members of the German Bundesrat. Imagine if Emmanuel Macron decided fundamentally to change the composition of the French Senate. It couldn't be done without a major constitutional process. There was an opportunity to build consensus, but the government has a mandate, and there is no rule that says that a government with a mandate needs to be wise or consensual. We're all allowed to be immoderate and mistaken. That's how the system works. I would actually make a defence not of the hereditary principle, which everyone says is indefensible, but of the hereditary practice that we see around us and which seems very defensible. We see it from high streets every time you see a sign saying, Williams and Son Butchers, right up to the throne. And people don't seem to find that at all indefensible. But none of that is going to persuade the government benches. And frankly, I'm a supporter of it always sounds very transgressive to say this here. I'm a supporter of an elected House, which I always feel slightly guilty of saying here, even though it is, I think, the position of every party represented at the other end, from the Greens to Reform. I don't know why it's such an odd position. No, the fundamental, the insuperable objection to this legislation is simply that it breaks a deal. And that was conceded by the noble lady Baroness Smith of Basildon in her opening remarks when she said that the mechanism for hereditary by-elections was never expected to be used. It was never expected to be used, as Lord Irvine of Legge confirmed at the time, in the late 90s, because he expected the second stage of reform to have come into effect before the first by-election took place. There was a bargain, in effect, between the hereditaries and the Labour Party. And the bargain was that the hereditaries wouldn't hold up Tony Blair's 1998 legislation in exchange for the remaining reprieved 92. So to say that it's indefensible or that it's irrational or that it doesn't make sense is utterly beside the point. The 92, if you like, were there precisely to be the pebble in the shoe, the reminder that the second stage of reform had not been delivered, that we were not going to remain with a Zimbabwean system of the executive appointing half of the legislature. And what the current bill does is to tap that pebble from the shoe without delivering the rest of the bargain, without moving to a democratic upper house. And fundamentally, that is what is wrong. It is dishonest and it's dishonourable. It's dishonest because to claim that the only reason that this can't be done is because it's a delaying tactic, and unless we all agree on everything until it's all agreed, nothing will happen, that doesn't apply when you've just won a majority of 411 at the other end. The government is perfectly capable, if it wants to, of having a democratic upper house. It's refusing to do so for the same reason that every previous government has done, which is that it likes to have the patronage powers and to be able to move people out of the way. But I will remind the party opposite that it has been their commitment since 1902 to have a democratic upper house, and they entered into an explicit bargain in 1998. The hereditaries delivered their side, the Labour Party should deliver its side. Pacta sunt servanda.